Greetings and warm welcome to our expert session of the day, uncovering the EU Battery Passport requirements. So before we go into the details, a quick introduction for the speakers for today. Starting with myself, my name is Ankit Singla. I'm based here in Mannheim, Germany, and responsible as a global practice lead for sustainability and traceability solutions at Engineering Industries Excellence. And I have my colleague here with me, Pedram. Pedram, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Pedram Behevi. I'm based in London, and I'm currently the Sustainability and Traceability Solutions Lead for Europe. Thanks,
Pedram. Moving to the next slide to speak about who we are. So, okay, as you see on the slide, Engineering Industries Excellence. Engineering Industries Excellence is a global division of the engineering group. So as an engineering group, we are the end-to-end system integrators and providing the holistic digital solutions covering end-to-end lifecycle and supply chain across all industries, products, and processes. So we cover, let's say, the end-to-end implementation for the digital supply chain. We make sure that we help companies to be, let's say, transforming their digital solutions across their supply chain. Yeah. And as you can see on the slide, we are all over the world, and we have done more than 1,500 global transformation projects with more than 30 plus industry markets. And we have been working with our customers worldwide to deliver the Industry 4.0 standards. When it comes to digital supply chain solutions, we have been working with our customers in different markets to provide different solutions when it comes to advisory services, when it comes to implementing and providing, solutions across different practices. So yes, that's us as Engineering Industries Excellence. All right, and before we jump into the topic of the day around the EU battery regulation. So as we know that the demand to be, looking into the EU climate actions and EU Green Deal to be sustainable and be like, carbon with the carbon neutral to have zero carbon emissions by 2050. So there have been a lot of discussions and regulations coming up to support the, EU initiative for the Green Deal. So maybe Pedram, if you could kind of take us through what this whole EU battery regulation means and looks like for the battery manufacturers, the OEMs, on what are the regulations which they have to comply. And if you could explain us a bit more, then let's deep dive into the topic of the day. So over to you, Pedram.
Thanks, Ankit. So a look at the regulatory drivers for the battery passport requirements. There are a group of policies introduced by the EU Commission, which come under the umbrella of the European Green Deal. Ultimately, these are aimed at making the European Union climate neutral by 2050. And the benefits of that, as one can imagine, are largely around protecting biodiversity, fighting pollution and the effects of climate change, cleanliness of air and waterways, etc. But in addition to that, another significant element is that the EU Commission wants to drive industry, innovation and competitiveness of the EU market when it comes to spaces such as batteries and later other industries and other products. One of the key pillars of the EU Green Deal is the Circular Economy Action Plan. And the Circular Economy Action Plan actually encompasses the entire life cycle of a product, from the initial design and conception of a product, ensuring that it's recyclable, that it's composed of materials that are not hazardous, that can be recycled, to ensure that materials are not single use, to ensure that they are recovered and put back in the cycle. And again, this will have some ecological benefits, but also it's anticipated that this will drive innovation and competitiveness of the EU marketplace. We see three pieces of regulation that are derived from the Circular Economy Action Plan. One is the Eco Design for Sustainable Products. As the name suggests, this puts an emphasis on ensuring that products at their initial conception are designed to be sustainable, to be recyclable, easily dismantled. We have the battery regulation. This is where the requirements for the battery passports are specified. This has now come into force. And we also have the end-of-life vehicle regulation that mandates vehicle battery passports. And we anticipate a future link between battery passports and vehicle passports. So next, exploring a little bit about the timelines in relation to the battery passport. Well, I won't look at the specific milestones that we anticipate, but what we can look at is that the requirements can be categorized into these 4 categories broadly: carbon footprint reporting, responsible sourcing, which relates to ESG factors and supply chain assurances, digital reporting. This refers to the battery passport itself going live with a digital battery passport. And lastly, circularity, how recyclable, dismantleable a product is, and there is an increasing scale of recyclability required for products. So as we can see, some of the requirements for carbon footprint reporting are just around the corner. As of 2025, there will be requirements to report carbon footprints, and then steadily, round about every 6 months or so, we see another milestone for reporting. But I guess the big one that everyone has their eye on is February 2027, when the battery passport requirements come into effect. So some key factors in relation to the EU battery passport split into scope, responsibility, and access groups. In terms of scope, really any battery above 2 kilowatt hours is effectively in scope of the battery passport requirements. An obvious example, and the largest sector right now, is electronic vehicles, EVs. But in addition to that, there are light means of transport, aviation industry, the maritime industry, and also things like storage solutions, or energy storage solutions, batteries for energy storage solutions. So above 2 kilowatt hours, very, very likely that the requirements for the battery passports will apply. In terms of responsibility, this is always an interesting area to explore when dealing with EU regulation, and the devil is always in the detail. So it's important for those involved in the supply chain to scrutinize their supply chain processes and to understand their role within the battery value chain as a stakeholder, and how that relates to their responsibilities for the battery passport. But when we talk about battery passport ownership, whom will be responsible for issuing a battery passport and ensuring that it's appropriately accessible, holds the right data fields, etc., this is stated as being the economic operator that places the battery on the EU market. The other key factor is that the responsibility for the battery passport can change throughout the lifetime of the battery as it transitions from one stage of its life to another. So for instance, if a battery is placed on the market in an electric vehicle and it's later repurposed for an energy storage solution, then that would constitute a change of ownership. And again, if a battery goes to recycling or waste, again, this constitutes a change of ownership. And the solutions we have in place must permit that change of ownership. In terms of access groups, the battery passport data will be largely accessible to the general public, freely accessible, but there are also some data categories that are reserved for what are called industry parties or authorities. These will be the likes of EU regulators or other bodies within the EU entities, within the EU markets that may need access to that. So now we can look a little bit more about the EU passport requirements. And a good way to do that is to start by looking at the goals of the EU battery passport. And this can be summarized as really wanting to drive sustainability and competitiveness of the EU battery value chain via complete life cycle management. So the key components of this, enabling a shift from linear to circular economies. Linear economies largely in play today. We put in virgin materials, we will produce a semi-finished good or a component that is assembled into a finished product. Finished product is placed on a market and sold, and more or less forgotten about. The shift that the EU regulations and primarily the EU Battery Passport want to initiate is a shift to a circular economy, whereby we're looking at the life cycle of a product differently. In terms of how it's designed, it should be recyclable, it should be constituted of recycled materials, and we should be able to extract materials from a finished product once it reaches the end of its life. So gradually, we should be minimizing the virgin materials that go into the supply chain. We should be seeing an increased utilization of recycled materials and an increase in the materials that can be extracted from waste products. Again, when we talk about shift from linear to circular economies, we will likely also see shifts in business models, whereby we may see the introduction of things like products as a service. So instead of selling a product and forgetting about it, or selling a product and providing some aftermarket care, effectively we could see product as a service models where products are effectively leased and maintained for the life of the product by a single economic operator, which would be responsible for the life cycle of that product. Next category, transparency for decision making. So if we take a step back and we look at the battery passport, there's going to be a wealth of supply chain data that's generated and is accessible. If this data is analyzed from the right perspective, it can quantitatively drive decision making. So whether it's data from the operational life of a battery that informs future design, future features, and usability of a battery, or whether it's data from an operational life of a battery that informs its value, its suitability for second use or reuse, there will be data there to draw from and make informed decisions. This is, again, another key pillar of what the battery passport sets out to achieve. Lastly, a paradigm shift, redefining priorities and driving innovation. When we look at the battery passport requirements, and when we look at the increasing scale of recyclability or recycled materials that must be extracted from the waste battery, there is a suggestion that technology needs to take a step forward. Innovation is needed to reach those goals, those lofty aspirations. And this can ultimately be an advantage for the EU if there is research and development, if there is intellectual property that arises as a result of these requirements. These can be a competitive edge for the EU market. So taking a closer look at the battery passport requirements, effectively the battery passport requires a unique identifier for any battery above 2 kilowatt hours placed on the EU market. And this unique identifier or battery passport must hold against it various data that can be split into 7 categories. As we see, we have general battery information. This is effectively associated with the model number of the battery and where it originated, what the expected performance is. We have compliance labels. Some of this exists today in terms of what the battery contains or how it's made or how it should be recycled. But also we will see the introduction of things like the EU Declaration of Conformity. The carbon footprint. So this is obviously a significant element of the ecological benefits to this initiative. Minimizing carbon footprints and reducing carbon footprints is a key goal. So we must have visibility of that carbon footprint and we must be able to take action to reduce it. Supply chain due diligence. So environment, social and governance factors, ESG factors, are becoming increasingly prevalent and their profile is rising in the marketplace. And the supply chain due diligence effectively demonstrates that battery passport owners have scrutinized their supply chain to ensure that their products are from ethical sources, they're from sources which are minimizing environmental impact, and are suitable and are aligned with the EU goals. Battery materials and compositions. So the battery chemistry, what is the composition of the anode? What's the composition of the cathode? What are the critical materials? What are the hazardous substances? This must be recorded against the battery passport, and again, can be used to inform things like suitability for reuse and second life, or when it comes to recycling, what resources can be extracted from that battery. Circularity and resource efficiency. So here we must have a record of how the battery should be dismantled, how it can be recycled, how components can be replaced, prolonging the life of a battery, ensuring that it's designed in a way that it's serviceable and repairable, again, is a big driver of making that battery sustainable. The longer it can serve its purpose, the more sustainable and ecological it can be. Also, in terms of circularity, this is where we will have a record of the renewable content or the recyclability of that battery. Last but not least, performance and durability. This particular set of attributes is expected to be dynamic, is expected to arise from the operational life of the battery. And ultimately, it can give us a good indication of the state of health of that battery. To what extent can it charge and what are the charge and recharge capabilities? Has it been subject to any negative events that may make it unsuitable for particular uses or affect its performance? This will be critical data when it comes to resale or evaluating the next phase of life for that battery. So looking at the life cycle of the battery passport, how do we get from raw materials to a battery passport, and what's the battery passport expected to accomplish? What's it expected to do during the lifetime of the battery? Well, we've summarized things here, we've condensed them down into these 6 steps, but effectively step number 1 is to collect the battery data that we saw in the previous slide. So that data will come from various sources. Much of it will be model specific, can come from ERP, but some of it will be battery specific. And we'll particularly see this in terms of the battery performance and operational data arising from the battery, but also when we move to having to demonstrate a greater recyclable content for the battery, this may differ from one batch to another batch of raw materials, or from one set of components to another, whether it's cells, modules that form a pack. So eventually this data is likely to become more dynamic as well. Once we have this data, we must collate it and we must associate it with a unique identifier for the finished battery which hits the market. And that's where we create the battery passport and we make that data accessible. Step number 3, the battery is in operational use, whether it's an EV, energy storage solution, or any other use. We will receive dynamic data from that battery, how it's performing, how it's operating. And as we stated before, this gives us a good view of the state of health of the battery, how it's performing, and suitability for second life and reuse. There are certain milestones, certain occurrences through the operational life of a battery that will also be captured and recorded against the battery passport. These will be things like regular servicing, which could be made mandatory and linked to the warranty of the battery. It could be things like replacing components. If batteries are made repairable, we could see cells replaced, modules replaced, we might see battery management systems replaced. Again, those dynamic elements will be recorded against the battery and will help us make informed decisions about the state of that battery later during its lifetime. We mentioned the transfer of ownership in case of second use, second life, or recycling. The battery ownership will change hands from the original battery passport owner to whomever is responsible for the battery in its second life, second use, or for recycling. And last but not least, that battery once it's been through its second life, second use, will hopefully be recycled, broken down, dismantled, and set to waste. This will be recorded against the battery passport. So we will have this view right across the operational life of the battery, from when it hits the market, goes into operation, to when it's ultimately dismantled and removed from the market. So what can a battery passport solution look like? Well, the consensus is that the data that we need to store against an individual battery passport will actually arise from right across the battery supply chain. And this will extend to vendors that are providing raw materials or providing components. And what we see is that there's a great variety across the battery supply chain. You could have scenarios where a single economic operator, a single entity, is responsible for the manufacture of the battery, the entire supply chain of the battery from source to finished battery. Or you can have different variations where battery components such as cells or modules are being insourced and packs produced. There are various scenarios for the battery supply chain, but ultimately what we can say is the data arising from the different stages of the supply chain, whether that's a single economic operator or whether that's a number of economic operators that are partnering and collaborating, the data from the different stages of the supply chain must be captured, must be accumulated, and must be shared to inform the next stage. And that's what we're showing at the bottom of this diagram here. We've got the milestones, high-level milestones for the battery supply chain process. The data accumulated must pass to the next stage because ultimately it must be made available to the battery passport owner when that battery is issued and placed on the market. After that, we see data originating from the battery use. We touched on the reasons for that. And again, this data must be accumulated and must be stored against the original battery passport. It will inform decisions about the value of that battery, the state of health, reuse, etc. That data may arise from different systems, from different stakeholders, but ultimately it will have to be accumulated in a central repository that will be run by the battery passport owner or a third party that has been assigned that responsibility. There are data elements which we understand will need to be reported to the EU authorities, and details of exactly what needs to be reported are yet to be announced. But ultimately, the data for an individual battery passport will need to be made available to those different access groups. Elements of it will need to be made available to the EU Commission. And how we understand it is that the web portal is going to act like a web directory. It's going to point to the different data elements within an individual within an individual battery passport. It's not necessarily going to store all of that data. So there's a mention of a decentralized approach to the battery passports, and that's likely what we will see. We will see different elements possibly maintained by different stakeholders, but centrally accessible to the battery passport owners, and elements of that data reported to the Commission and accessible via the web portal. So now look at the value. So what are the benefits that we can realize once the battery passport is implemented, once it's up and running? The first key point here is moving away from supply chains where we put in raw materials and we have a finished product, but moving to the concept of value chains. So considering a product throughout its lifetime, extending that supply chain view. And if we take that view right across the battery value chain, starting with miners and refiners, there's value to be gained from being a stakeholder within the battery passport value chain. So for miners and refiners, they will increasingly need to demonstrate their ESG credentials, their environment, social, and governance credentials. That can be certified, it can be verified with supply chain traceability data that's shared with other members of the value chain. Similar for precursor and CAM producers, they will have improved visibility of their supply chain. So they will have various vendors for refined materials, and they can make an informed decision about which they select, perhaps based on their ESG values or on a lower carbon footprint. If these values are captured and shared, this can act as a differentiator and inform decision-making for stakeholders within the value chain. For sell and pack producers, so again, improved visibility of their supply chain. This can bring about supply chain resilience. You may have a number of vendors to give you greater choice across ESG, carbon footprint credentials or ecological credentials. And having this visibility can help to bring about supply chain resilience and to mitigate supply chain risks. Again, ESG factors from suppliers can be a differentiator there. The data that we will see from the operational life of batteries can be very informative for cell and pack producers. It can inform how they design their products or particular features that are of relevance for the operational life of a battery. For OEMs who are likely to be battery passport owners, again, improved supply chain visibility, resilience, visibility of ESG certifications, etc. Similarly, data that can inform build and usage of future batteries can be gained from the operational life of the battery stored against the battery passport. For consumers, really the great advantage here is that at any moment in time, they will have a view of the state of health of their battery, how many cycles it's been through, how it's currently performing, what its capacity is. And that can really help to inform decisions about second life, second use, and value. Is this the right time for me to sell my vehicle? Or ultimately, if you're purchasing a battery, purchasing an EV, you will have access to data relating to the operational life of that battery. Has it been through any negative events? And is it performing to specification? Am I willing to purchase this battery and own it for the next X number of years? Second life and second use. So extending the operational life of a battery is a great contributor to sustainability, and the battery passport data will allow to make informed decisions about the second life or second use of a battery. Depending on the state of health of a battery, it will be used for certain second life applications, and it won't be useful for others. So there can be informed decisions there. And again, the value of the battery can also be determined for such purposes. Transport. So used batteries can be volatile when they're stored or transported. This means that if they're not cared for properly, if they're not stored, if they're not transported correctly, they can catch fire or they can explode. So if we have battery passport data, if we know the chemical composition of that battery, if we know if it's a high-risk battery because of its operational life data, transport providers can take appropriate precautions. They can transport batteries correctly, they can store them correctly, and minimize the risks that they inherit. Last but not least, recyclers. The battery passport data will tell them the composition of that battery, what the recycled content is, how much or which materials they can expect to be able to extract from that battery, and also the dismantling and recycling procedures. So again, ultimately, the message here is that we should move away from the supply chain view and have a view of the value chain, extend that battery life as much as possible. And we can see that the various stakeholders involved in the battery value chain can stand to benefit from the data visible and associated with the battery passport. In the next section, we're going to be looking at the index approach to the battery passport compliance, and I'll hand over back to Ankit at this stage.
Yeah, thanks, Madam. Thanks for the insights. And just to recap before we jump into the index solution approach. So, what we try to understand and cover is that we understand now the EU regulatory or EU Commission drive towards sustainability and circularity. We understand the kind of the EU battery passport timeline. We understand the EU battery passport, key factors, who is responsible with what kind of access groups and scope for the EU battery passports, as well as we kind of you walked us through with the EU battery passport, requirements and what it comprises of and how we are gonna collect all this information for from an economic operator responsibility perspective, and how the responsible economic operator is going to share this information towards the, let's say, battery repository, or let's say from a EU Commission perspective, right? And what I would say that when we jump into the index solution approach, we have been, let's say, reviewing or looking into all the global as well as the European Commission level, consortiums, how they have been kind of reviewing all these requirements, which will be, needed from the, EU regulation around managing the batteries and the battery regulations. So understanding, reviewing, and all the standards available in the market, because we talk about the decentralized approach, we talk about not reinventing the wheel and using the available standards in the market, the best practices. So looking into that, we have come across with our solution approach towards complying with this battery passport requirements. So if we move to the next slide, we divide this approach into three steps. Yeah, so when we go into the complete solution based upon the timeline, so what you see here in the first step, what we talk about is setting up your battery traceability foundation, as well as looking into doing your corporate as well as product carbon footprint calculations. So this is our step one, which will help all the battery manufacturers, the responsible economic operators, to be able to share that information for this 2025 timeline. So what you can see in this particular slide is that based upon how you have your data sitting into your environment as of today, within your ERP systems, within your MES systems, how you are producing or managing the production of those batteries, or assembling, or manufacturing them, as well as all the processes around the logistics to make sure that you can move this into your logistics supply chain. So here we talk about setting up your battery traceability foundation, repository or layer, where you can collect all this information, as well as we talk about how we collect and do all the carbon footprint management. So here, of course, we understand that there are different level of emissions. We talk about the direct emissions, we talk about the indirect emissions, but when we talk about the battery passport, we definitely talk about the scope 3 emissions, which are more towards the emission generated during the logistics processes as well. So basically, within step one, where we talk about is that we come together with our best practices to make sure that we can understand your existing landscape, how you are as a battery manufacturer or a responsible economic operator, how you have your existing data into your landscape, and how we can help you to kind of comply with those requirements to set up these two layers, which is the battery foundation layer, as well as how we can help you to calculate your carbon footprint calculations. So if we go to the next slide, so basically, when we have kind of established the battery traceability foundation layer, and we talk about, we have a solution to make sure that we can record and kind of collect the data to do the carbon footprint calculations. Here we are enabling to make sure that the upstream and the downstream partners are connected to make sure that we can collect all the sustainability data later on needed for the EU battery passport or EU digital product passport, from a concept perspective, where we say that, from your upstream partners, from your suppliers, you can kind of receive that information, to kind of collect the information, to process that information, as well as later on when we go towards the downstream partners, with your recyclers, dismantlers, or when this battery goes into refurbishment, replacements, whatever, then we can also retrieve that data. If the appropriate responsible economic operator is required to comply and make sure that this responsible economic operator is exchanging the data with the European Commission based upon the requirements. So this is, in this step, we enable the appropriate battery manufacturers or the OEMs to make sure that they can connect their upstream, downstream partners, as well as make sure that the appropriate interfaces, APIs, whatever are needed for this battery traceability foundation layer are available, to be able to generate the EU battery passport, to be able to exchange that information. And as you can see, that this is basically to make sure that you comply with the 2027 from a timeline perspective requirement, that we enable you to make sure that you can generate your EU product passport data, or the EU digital product passport, as well as the EU battery passport data. Yeah. In the next slide, what we take as our approach is that once we make sure that we have managed to calculate the carbon footprint, we have managed to onboard and get our upstream, downstream partners to, collect the data, to build the EU battery passport data to be, exchanged with the authorities. What we also look into is that we will also be able to declare the data within the industry network. When we talk about, there are different tier 1, tier N suppliers, and as well as the, partners with you might be exchanging the information or needed to exchange the information. So we also make sure that when we talk about the, industry network, we enable the battery manufacturers or the OEM to be interoperable, kind of to share the data across the industry network. So within this approach, we make sure that the carbon footprints declared, and in case somebody else is the responsible economic operator and you need to share that data, then we enable you to share that data, as well as we also make sure that we enable you to make sure that the appropriate product genealogy across the supply chain at the serialized lot level, or as a unique identifier level, you can share that information. And here you could see that in the industry network, we make sure that at a material traceability level, at the moment we talk about the battery pack, but if we go one step beyond to go into the product genealogy, we also make sure that you can kind of connect into your industry network to increase the value chain transparency across the complete product genealogy. So we take this 3-step approach to kind of cover the requirements into a step-by-step approach, to make sure that when the requirements are being finalized, there is as we say, that there are global consortiums, there is work happening on the EU Commission level. We want to make sure that you, as a battery manufacturer OEM, not only look at the European requirements, but also when things go global, when there are other markets coming up with similar requirements, we make sure that you can handle these requirements also, not only at the European level, but at a global level. Yeah. All right. So then if we go to the next slide, what you can see is that we have already enabled and built, using these 3-step approach. We have already built our own battery passport viewer. So here you can see a visualization of how this battery passport viewer looks like, as already explained by my colleague Pedram, that when we look at the different 7 categories, you could see here in these different tabs that all the information about the compliance, labels and certification, the material composition, ESG data with the supply chain due diligence reports, the battery performance factors, all the information is available. And as you can see in this particular battery passport viewer, we enable this for a public access that when this data is going to be made available, we can query this to the let's say the European Commission battery passport registry to fetch this information, as well as this will be connected with the responsible economic operator traceability foundation layer to make sure that this data is accessible publicly, as well as with the other authorizations or the levels where you can access this information. Yeah. So why we should start now? And maybe Pedram, if you could share your experience, what we have been hearing, listening, that is this the right time based upon the timelines? Should we start now, or should we wait once the the regulations and the standards are formally publicized? Do we already have the European Commission system? So what's the right time, right? So if you want to put some light on that topic. So over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Ankit. So when we look at the timelines, as we did at the outset of this presentation, we can see that the battery passport requirements actually stipulate February 2027, and to some of us that may seem a long time away. I think what experience tells us is that such endeavors that are going to really encompass your entire supply chain, they're going to require a degree of integration and data exchange with vendors that likely doesn't exist today. Time is really imperative. Time will be needed to prepare, to plan, to pilot, and to implement. So starting with a comprehensive analysis of supply chain processes and operations to determine where you stand as an economic operator. This is not always as straightforward as it may seem. For instance, large enterprises tend to be broken up into different legal entities, and really some supply chain analysis is needed to understand which legal entity has the ultimate responsibility and what information, what data do they need from the other legal entities. Not something that should be underestimated. Identifying and selecting the right partners and the right solutions. So really, there's going to be a number of options out there for compliance with the battery passport. And I think battery passport owners will need to evaluate and identify suitable solutions and ultimately suitable partners. This is going to be a journey, and it will take some time, both the identification and the implementation. So this should be suitably accounted for. Embedding and adapting. So battery passport compliance will come from a number of integrated solution components. Some of those will exist in your landscape. They will be in operational use today. They will be known to operators. Others will be new. And this also will apply to some business processes. Some of those will stay as they are. Some of those will change. Ultimately, effective change management is critical to having a successful solution and minimizing operational risk and impact. And that requires time. If we move early, if we adopt early, we have time to adapt to the new processes, the new technologies, the new solutions, but also embed them, which also provides some opportunities to optimize and gain the benefits from this supply chain visibility, from the optimized processes that are associated with it. Enjoying the benefits of supply chain traceability. So we touched on the resilience that this can bring about. It can help to mitigate risks in supply chains if you have that increased integration with your upstream. In terms of the downstream visibility, again, we saw the benefits of operational data and informing design features or operational use of a battery. And things like recall processes. This is something that can be made very accurate, very specific, and can dramatically reduce the timescales once you have supply chain traceability solutions in place. Last but not least, demonstrable commitment to sustainability. So sustainability, the effects of climate change, ESG factors, environment, social governance, these are of increasing importance to various different industries and to the general population. and adopting supply chain traceability, being able to demonstrate your credentials, whether it comes to circularity, whether it's ESG, whether it's the recycled composition or content of your products. These can really demonstrate your commitment to these topics and differentiate you from competitors. I think that's something we will see increasingly in the marketplace, and something that I think economic operators will look to and lean on from a marketing perspective as well. Okay, I think at that point, I'll hand over back to you, Ankit, for the last few slides.
Yeah, thanks, John. All right, so yeah, just to recap, so we spoke about the EU regulation for the battery passports. We spoke about, engineering industry's excellence solution approach. We spoke about why now, and then it brings me to the topic that what value and what benefits we as an engineering industry's excellence add here, and what are our expertise and capabilities around this topic. So if we go to the next slide, so basically what we are putting as a value proposition on the table is that we are already working and delivering the digital thread for Industry 4.0. We are kind of niche and distinctive when it comes to proprietary methodologies, when it comes to sustainability and traceability solutions, when it comes to strategic global partnerships with our customers. We don't work particularly in one region. We are working globally with our customers, also established globally. And for us, we definitely stay product agnostics when it comes to providing our consulting and solution offerings. Yeah. So what you see here is that when it comes to the battery passport and battery regulations, what we are definitely working and looking at is when it comes to the integration, we are very well aware about the traceability and sustainability use cases when it comes to the Catena X initiative. So we are already working with the implementation of the certified solutions when it comes to provide the trust services with the likes of SAP and Siemens certified solutions. Yeah. When you look at the implementation partners, we already work very closely with SAP solutions, with Siemens solutions. We already work with the global standards. GS1, we are already certified with the FIWARE Foundation when it comes to the Industry 4.0 standards, the likes of AAS, Asset Administration Cells, and looking at the Industry 4.0 standards. Because here we understand that for all the OEMs out there, it is not about reinventing the wheel and defining new standards, and also looking at a close look at the European Commission. It's not about building something new, but it is about reusing the standards already available in the market, right? And here you can see that we already work closely and look at our media references. We understand the all the good work being put up by the consortiums like CEPAS and the Battery Pass. We work closely with the Battery Associates, so we definitely understand and closely work with the standards and the requirements being discussed and all the technical specifications being released. So basically, when you look at engineering industry's excellence as us as Index, we help companies out there to transform and come across to make sure that we can support into their implementations or the advisory services when it comes to make sure that we can add the value to make sure that they can comply with this EU regulations or the global regulations when it comes to digital product passports and the requirements around the battery passport. Yeah. So if you go to the next slide, what we are already gonna come with the work we have been putting and the team doing a great amount of good work. So in our next webinar, we are already gonna come and showcase an end-to-end battery passport, solution, where you could see here in the slide that, we are gonna display the battery passport from a public access and a responsible economic operator view perspective. So you saw in the previous slides that how a battery passport viewer will look like, where you can access the information, right? And then from an responsible economic operator, what this we spoke about the traceability foundation layer. So how the economic operator backend solution will look like, where it will have the digital twin of the individual battery passport or the battery components with full end-to-end lifecycle transparency, how you will get the data from your upstream downstream partners, and how this will be stored. So we will showcase the economic operator traceability foundation layer. Then we will go to the next step, which is the network integration traceability. We discussed the use of the certified solutions from the Catena X initiative. So here you will look at the connection to the network, creating the supply chain traceability, how you can expand and look at your product genealogy, which forms the battery pack with the battery modules and cells and beneath it. Yeah. And then what you will also see is that we will be showcasing the product carbon footprint calculation. So we have integrated the product carbon footprint data into the Catena X certified solution for the calculation of the carbon footprint data. And last but not the least, we will also showcase how we can look at the downstream partners when they have to update the battery information, right? So in case of carrying out a repair or a refurbishment or a recycling operation, how you update the battery information and how this can be displayed in the battery passport viewer. So watch out for the next webinar, which is going to come in next coming weeks, and we are going to showcase this end-to-end demonstration. And if we move to the next slide. If you're interested to look into more details about the EU Battery Passport and know about how this will empower sustainability and safety around the circularity across the entire battery life cycle, please refer to the link here for our white paper, which we have already published on our website. So please have a look, read through it, and we are more than happy to take any questions if there are, in case you're already looking and planning towards implementing for your EU battery passport regulations. So more than happy to take any further questions. So with that, we come towards the end of our webinar. Thanks for attending and thanks for your attention. And we look forward to come and meet and discuss any of your questions. Do definitely reach out and tune in, and keep watching this space from Engineering Industries Excellence, and we'll be back again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.